Hi, my name is Juwanza Hobson. I was born in Puerto Rico and raised in New York City and lived in Southern California for 16 years before coming here to Vietnam. I am a whopping 44 years old and I teach in My Tho, Vietnam, which is, My Tho is a small city of about 225,000 people in the south of Vietnam. I'm about an hour and a half south of Ho Chi Minh City / Saigon. It's a city on the Mekong Delta, which is like this series of rivers. Where did I go to university? I went to university at the University of California, Riverside as a global studies major. Where are my ancestors from? That's a good question. Do you know who your great-great-great-great-grandparents are? I was born in Puerto Rico, and my mother's Puerto Rican, so that side of my family, as far back as I know, is from Puerto Rico. You know, there's a whole deal where there were indigenous people. The Taino lived in Puerto Rico, and the Spanish colonized Puerto Rico and brought slaves from Africa. As far back as I know, my family on my mom's side is from Puerto Rico. On my dad's side, we're from Jamaica. The African population in Jamaica were brought from Africa as slaves of the English. So I'm not sure where in Africa my lineage of my ancestors, what country they're from, but I'd like to find out someday. An interesting aspect about my childhood is that I moved around a lot. So I first moved to New York from Puerto Rico when I was almost 2 years old. Between then and the time I was 18, I moved a total of 6 times. Usually when I moved, they were to places that were really culturally different from the previous place that I had lived. For example, when I first lived in New York City, I lived in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, which is basically, essentially a Black and Latino and Caribbean neighborhood. And I lived there till I was about 5, and then we moved to Flushing, Queens, which was a predominantly Korean, Italian, and Irish neighborhood. So imagine moves like that. That happened, 6 times. And so at some point looking back at it, I kind of felt like, was my life some kind of weird social experiment? Like, where were they going with this? What were they trying to do to me? What happened as a result of that is that I learned to adapt to new situations and to really find myself. I think that one way that we really get to know who we really are is by being put in different situations. When you're removed from the context that you're comfortable with, you're really forced to dig down and find, like, what is it, who is it that is intrinsically you. I went through that at a very young age, and it was pretty traumatic for a long time, but as an adult, I really see how it is an asset. Especially now that I'm living in a foreign country, in a city where hardly anyone speaks the same language that I do, or hardly anyone even understands the culture that I come from. So moving around a lot, that's a very interesting aspect about my childhood. Where have I interned or worked? I've had a lot of jobs. I've had a lot of odd jobs. Just some of the ones that stick out. I was a dog walker, or I worked in animal care for about 6 years, from my late teens to my early 20s. I was also a bike messenger for a while in New York City, which is like low-key suicidal, like to be riding a bike in the middle of New York City traffic in the middle of the day. So I did that. I worked in the casino gaming industry in Southern California for almost 10 years. And I was in a band, I was in a touring band that was pounding the pavement and pushing our record. And while I was doing that, I was playing guitar, songwriting, and also tour managing. So those are some of the jobs that stick out that I've had. So the question is, what is your religion? I am a Nichiren Buddhist, which means that I practice Nichiren Buddhism, which is a strand of Buddhism that's existed since roughly the 1300s. Practice is mainly chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo in the mornings and evenings. Nichiren Buddhism is a very kind of modernized form of Buddhism. There are no monks and there are no temples. They're just essentially lay practitioners, we call ourselves, that are just using the practice to better our lives and to better the lives of the people around us and to transform our environment. So this is one thing that's kind of interesting about coming to Southeast Asia is seeing the different ways that Buddhism is practiced. You can get really serious about it and meditate yourself or chant yourself as I do, or you can kind of just go to a temple and light some incense and give some money to the monks and kind of just check the Buddhism box, you know, when it comes up on a job application. I think that all of them are legitimate ways to practice, you know. So, but being here, being in Southeast Asia and seeing the different attitudes that people have about Buddhism and the different ways that people practice is really fascinating to me. If I could be reincarnated as anything in my next life, I would be a person again. I love animals, but animals, I think they just kind of react to their environment, you know, instinctually. Whereas people, we have the ability to really transform ourselves and transform our environments, you know, for better or for worse. You know, so being a person is kind of a big responsibility. But I would definitely, yeah, I like the agency of being a human being. So I'll definitely come back as one in my next lifetime. What I found most shocking about Vietnam when I first came here was the traffic. The traffic is just bananas, or I thought it was at the time. Now I'm kind of used to it. Yeah, I first came to Vietnam and landed in Da Nang with my friend Blanca, and I remember just trying to cross the street, trying to figure out, like, where do we get in here? There's just like this constant flow of traffic, and we'd be sitting at a street corner for like minutes on end, just watching it roll by, and then see some locals just kind of like walk straight out into oncoming traffic, practically without looking. You know, eventually we figured out, you know, you just have to take a leap of faith and just start walking, and that people will sort of adjust to you as you're moving and move around you. But it's kind of counterintuitive to walk into oncoming traffic. So that was kind of shocking when I first came here. My favorite thing about Vietnam is definitely the people. Not that people are things, people are people. But that was the question. I just find that the people in Vietnam tend to really be very sincere, and they have kind of a purity that I don't think we have in the U.S. People really say what they mean, you know, for better or for worse. It's sort of different, you know. I didn't realize that before coming out here, but in the U.S., I think we tend to really be sarcastic, whatever we're saying, in a lot of irony, you know, or cynicism, and that's really kind of absent from Vietnamese vernacular or the communication between Vietnamese people and Westerners. I really didn't notice it at first. I think what happened was maybe one of my first attempts to make like a kind of sarcastic or ironic joke fell on deaf ears, and they're just kind of like, wow, why would you say that? And it made me kind of look inwardly like, wow, why would I say that? That's kind of mean or unnecessary, you know. I think in the States, being that sincere is kind of seen as just like, why would you do that? Why would you say what you mean? That's so weird, you know? Whereas that doesn't really exist here. You know, people just say how they feel or what they mean about things. And that kind of purity, really, it's contagious. You know, I find myself to be way less sarcastic here, you know, and way less ironic in the way that I speak. I really say what I mean to people. So I really like what that brings out of my personality. So yeah, so the people in Vietnam are awesome. Definitely my favorite thing about being here. My favorite city in Vietnam, or my favorite place in Vietnam, is Hue. Hue is a city in the central of Vietnam. It's the former imperial city. So that's where the Nguyen kings lived, and there's like all these old like pagodas, and there's a big like a palace, a royal palace, and there's like a set of walls outside of the royal palace walls where there's a small city. And so Hue is like really quaint and sort of quiet, you know, but you could sort of get into some nightlife stuff there as well. But it's just really layered. I love how layered it is. It's a really good example of Vietnam, like a microcosm for Vietnam, in that it's a mix of like kind of modern, but also really ancient. You know, so you can go visit an ancient Cham temple in Hue. The Cham were people that lived thousands of years ago. It was a whole empire, the Cham Empire, that was sort of a part of the Indian Empire. And they've got these like temples that are thousands of years old that are still kind of standing. And you go over there, it's kind of like going to the Egyptian pyramids or something, you know? So you can do that, or you can go clubbing at night, you know, go to a dance club and, you know, hear like maybe hip hop that's only a few months old, you know, and dance till, you know, till the sun comes up. So Hue is really amazing that way, in that it's just got a lot of the best of the old and the new. Let's see, what do I do in my free time? So I brought my guitar out here from the States, and I still play guitar quite a bit. I've actually been playing a lot more now that I'm here than I had been the last few years that I was in the States. But some new things that I've picked up, I really like cross-country biking and photography. So I spend a lot of time traveling around, visiting pagodas and different naturally beautiful scenic sites, and taking pictures. Let me see, what other countries have I been to? I was born in Puerto Rico, which is another country. I was raised in the United States. I've been to 48 out of 50 states. I have family in Jamaica, so I visit there once in a while. I've also been to Japan, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, and Panama. My favorite American movie, that's kind of a toughie, but my gut response to say Pulp Fiction. I can watch that movie over and over and over again. I can flip on the TV, and if it's on, it doesn't even matter which scene, if it's at the beginning or the end. I can always watch it, and you know, I know a lot of the lines word for word. During one of my classes, I played a telephone game. Maybe, I don't know if you know what that is, but it's when somebody has a piece of paper with a phrase on it, and they have to say it into the person's ear next to them, and they have to say it to the next person, and they say it to the next person, and then by the end, you see if the person on the end gets the phrase correctly. So I played a telephone game with only quotes from Pulp Fiction. And I managed to keep it clean, too, which is kind of difficult with that movie. But yeah, I love that movie. The dialogue, acting, phenomenal. It's one of my favorites, if not my favorite. What's one thing Americans can learn from Vietnamese people? Vietnam, they have a really amazing holiday called Tet, and it's essentially Vietnamese New Year. But the way that they celebrate it, one of the rituals or one of the customs that I find really endearing is that during Tet holiday, people will sit down to eat dinner or maybe have drinks, but then at some point during the holiday, each person will spend time talking about each of the people that's there at the party and talking about what it is that they really love and appreciate about that person and what they wish for that person in the upcoming year. And I think that that's a really amazing tradition, just really reestablishing those bonds of caring and friendship or family, as opposed to just like getting blackout drunk and waking up with a hangover on January 1st. I really think that Americans can learn a lot about this aspect of Vietnamese culture, this kind of custom that exists during the Tet holiday.